So our next session, I have moderating this, Bejul Somaia from Lightspeed Ventures. Please join us on stage. And, you know, our next speaker is actually a very special time in his life. I think, you know, I first met Dheeraj about 4 years ago when he came to NPC. But, you know, our paths have crossed a couple of times, Dheeraj. I think you were hired at Trilogy the same year, 99, in Austin, Texas. Both of us worked at the same company when I started my fourth startup. And the fifth startup, actually, you know, the month I was acquired by Citrix, we had a common wall, and there was a small company, you know, with a small team, less than, I think, single-digit number of employees building a cloud software product on the other side of the wall. We were neighbors, and as we gave up our little office in Santa Clara, the Nutanix team moved in and took over. So welcome, Dheeraj. I think, you know, we look forward to the chat with Bejul. I think, you know, you've had one of the most outstanding IPOs of the year. Welcome to Bangalore.
Thank you. Let me just keep this here.
Oh, you've got a mic there? Yeah, you have.
Looks
okay,
like already. This is working, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Awesome.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Really excited this morning to have Dheeraj here. I mean, a couple of things, you know, I'd like to call out before we get started to provide context. You know, this is a pretty rare opportunity for us to interact with someone who made a transition from a VP engineering role, a very successful transition from VP engineering role to founder and CEO of now a public company. And, you know, and did that over a 6-year period. You know, Lightspeed had the privilege of leading your A round in middle of 2010.
Yeah. We met first in February 2010, and then investment was in July.
Yeah, so a relatively short time frame. And so would love to spend some time on this journey. And maybe starting out, Dheeraj, with how did this start? You were a VP engineering at Astrodata. What did you see? What was the gap you saw? What gave you the conviction to make this change? How obvious was it, or were you the only person in the world that saw it? If you can just take us back to that point in time and give us a little bit of insight about what the origin was and why you felt so compelled to do this.
Sure, absolutely. First of all, thanks for your time, folks. You know, this is obviously your time is precious. So, so going back to 2009, I guess we first kind of had to see within. You know, it's like. There was this burning desire to go and do something impactful. And I was trying to do that within my last job. And there was all this gut feeling about how SQL and NoSQL need to come together. You need to blend the two as opposed to look at them as silos. And it wasn't happening in the job because it was a relatively small company and it was 120 people. And the founders were not willing to let go of their strategy, which was 5 years old by the time they actually were in 2009 itself. And it just happened to be that, you know, realized that, you know, if you have all this gut call that you want to make, you might as well do it in your own company itself. Now, one of the things that I kept telling myself is the worst is not bad enough. And the more you repeat this, the more conviction you get to step out of your comfort zone and do something. Because, you know, in the Valley or even in Bangalore itself, you can find a job relatively easily, actually. So what's the worst? It's like you try this for a year, a couple of years, and, you know, you go back to a cushy job afterwards, something, you know. And obviously, you know, the first decision was to quit. It was not that, oh, we had the idea or anything, because ideas are a dime a dozen, actually, and a lot of these things actually shape themselves over time as well. So the first thing was to quit a job and really say, if you have all this kind of fire in the belly and you want to really go and shape it.
Take that first step.
Exactly. And then the question came, like, we had to work on something that was large. Not like, you know, think of an exit right away or, you know, think about a small little feature, or that could be a feature of a larger product, larger company. Said, if you're going and doing this, the opportunity cost is big. Because, you know, you're leaving, or you're at least forcing your family to sign up for this too. Because, you know, it's never really an individual decision. You know, your spouse, back then we didn't have children. And in fact, I was contemplating whether we should postpone having a family. And I asked my, one of my cousins who had sold, you know, he had successful companies. It was Nextag, one of the comparison shopping companies. and made tons of money in that. And he never got married. So I picked up the phone and asked him, what do you think about starting a family when I'm starting a company here as well? And he told me something really profound. He's like, if you become a father, you'll also become a better entrepreneur. And I kind of scratched my head and I said, I don't know what that really means, but tell me more. And he's like, it'll give you an opportunity to be more patient and mindful, because at the end of the day, you'll see a lot of highs and lows on an everyday basis, and it'll drive you nuts, you know. And those are the kind of things that you want to avoid, because you want to find the average line. You don't have to get too elated at the little wins, and you don't have to get too dejected when things don't go right, because that's what really causes a lot of trouble to entrepreneurs. So if you can find that average line, and one of the ways to do that is to really have a family and have children and stuff like that. So anyway, I think that's how the personal sort of conviction really began. We conceived of our first child when we got our money from Lightspeed in some sense, you know. And now we have 3 children. And, I mean, obviously my wife does a lot.
Yeah.
And they're all 6 and below. So, I mean, basically the company is older than my oldest child. And then obviously there was a lot of on the product strategy on what to really build. We're looking at what was happening in the web properties, and the web properties were actually doing everything in pure software. As Tarkan mentioned, everything is software. And then in our personal lives, everything was becoming software. I mean, if you look at your iPhone, there's no devices that people are using, special purpose, single purpose devices, a camera, a music player, a voice recorder, a GPS device, everything was becoming pure software. And we said, look, we need to bring this kind of convergence to the masses. So need to conceive of what that product will look like, which is basically for the masses, and then build for every application this new architecture, this new computing architecture, where all you see in a data center is racks and racks of servers and nothing but servers. So highly undifferentiated hardware, and all the value and the differentiation is the pure software. Let's bring that to the masses. And one of the big challenges was design. Like, how do you really make it usable? And because you're shipping these complex systems. Because the moment you actually take this approach of disaggregating big, expensive, fridge-like boxes and put them into pure software, it becomes difficult to use. So, from day one, we really emphasized design. What does it mean to really design the product and think about user experience, and what would Apple do? Not what would the traditional enterprise software companies do, but what would Apple do to really solve for that? Actually.
And Dheeraj, anytime you're sort of bringing a new paradigm, it's going to be pushing uphill to some extent. How did you build a conviction, that this was the right way to go? Or did you not have it, and was the early sales cycle very much a grind, and over time you sort of saw glimpses? Tell us a little bit about, because for a lot of entrepreneurs early on, there's no right answer. You have a different point of view, which could be disruptive, but how do you find takers for that? How do you build momentum behind your point of view?
Well, just like VMware from 10 years ago, and Diane says this all the time, like, we were the most non-disruptive, disruptive technology of our time, because obviously it disrupted the hardware business and servers, but it didn't disrupt the operating system, Linux or Windows, because they didn't see a change. I mean, nothing changed about Microsoft, nothing changed about Linux, and they were fooled into believing they're working on bare metal hardware, even though they were not, because they were going through this software emulation layer, the translation that the hypervisor actually did. So we had a very similar kind of design point, that nothing must change above us, while everything will change below us. So we hide all this complexity, but provide a facade of no change. And that's how you reduce friction in early adoption, because obviously, if you change everything top to down, where you expect all the applications to be rewritten and all the hypervisor code to be rewritten, then basically you're boiling the ocean, and those are the things that don't work. So one of the design points was to make sure that we provide this facade of no change at all above us, and we basically abstract out everything that was changing below us itself.
And sort of, fast forward to where we are now. Was this also obvious at the beginning? I mean, when you sat down at the beginning and thought about what success looks like and attached time frames to it, really how much of this could you see, you know, and how much is the journey? And at what point internally did you start feeling like this thing is going to fly? What were some of the triggers around that? But before that, kind of how much of this could you have seen? And talk a little bit about how it unfolded.
Well, we never put like these numbers in front of us because they would be fake. Whatever numbers you put in are going to be made up.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember when we went to raise money from Vinod, this is our Series B. It's still a pre-revenue company, so it's $0 actually in some sense. And we were insistent, Vinod, we needed an 140 because that's post-money valuation. He's like, are you sure you were talking about? I'm like, yeah, absolutely know what I'm talking about. And he kind of bought into the vision and the people. But when he asked, what do you think you'll do in 2012? All of calendar 2012, and he said, we'll probably do 4 million. And they're like, oh, that's good, from a pre-revenue to 4 million. And we actually did 17 million in the first year. I mean, the company's, and our fiscal is August to July. And our first fiscal, which was half a year of selling, which was August of 11 through July of 12, we did about 7 million. Then we did 51 million and 150 million and 320 million and then 640 million. We never really put a number as our goal. I think what we said, we'll do all the right things. And what are the things that really are foundational, fundamental? One is definitely culture. I mean, the fact that nobody is above the law, there are no divas in the company, was fundamental to the company actually, because you wanted to empower the grassroots. I mean, one of the examples of grassroots is, Bask is not here, right? We can talk about VMware?
I don't see him.
In January of 14, we were pushed to the edge by VMware because just like Apple, Microsoft, we were kind of friends, like Apple and Microsoft were in the 80s where Microsoft was building apps on top of Apple, and then Microsoft said, we're going to build the whole thing. We're going to have our own operating system. A similar thing happened with Nutanix and VMware. We're building an app on top of VMware, and they really pushed us to the limits. Similar to the way Google pushed Apple on Maps, and then finally what came out was Apple Maps because of this extremely self-righteous and forceful way in which Google was acting with Apple. So anyway, I think something similar happened in VMware and us. And the grassroots basically said, we need to show them a finger. We need to own our own destiny. We need to build our own hypervisor. We need to really control our stack. And even though we work on top of VMware, we said we'll build this whole thing. So I think the grassroots empowerment was really
And you would
important.
attribute that fight to culture.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, and we just said, we're not going to touch these two people because enough naysayers within the company were saying, does the world need yet another hypervisor? We already have 3. There's an open source from Red Hat, there's VMware's, and there's Microsoft's. And what has come out in the last 3-4 years of this empty canvas approach of what would the cloud hypervisor look like, as opposed to what would the data center hypervisor, which the design point was 15 years ago, would look like. I think something really elegant and simple and beautiful has actually come out. So I think we just did the right things with respect to culture, with respect to not borrowing from the future, because you could always look at things like accounting, RevRec, things like that, where you're making a lot of the billings and revenue go head to head, where you could actually have something that's deferred because it shows you future business and predictability and things like that. We didn't look at sales as a coin-operated bunch of people. It's very important because if you put your conventional hat on, everybody says, oh, sales is coin-operated. But actually, at the end of it all, they're highly ethical people. I mean, they're fathers, they're husbands, they're sons and daughters and mothers and so on and so forth. So we looked at sales extremely differently as well, and that has really helped the culture of the business. I mean, we're employed in 40 countries now. 35% of our business is outside the US. And a lot of it has been possible because we really looked at salespeople as people.
So it sounds like for you, a lot of it was, let's do the things we believe in.
Absolutely.
Let's do the right thing. And that was driving results. Yeah, you would have had some planning, but if there's one thing you know for sure is what you think is going to happen is not going to happen. That's
Absolutely.
perhaps the only thing you really
And
do.
then we had some benchmarks. Like we said, what did NetApp do in the first 5 years? What did Data Domain do? What did Riverbed do? What did Palo Alto Networks do? So we always had a graph next to them and say, are we doing better than them or
Right.
not?
What does good look like? What does world class
What is
look
good?
like?
Absolutely. And then we got a lot of talent from there. We said we got to steal a lot of talent from these
So
companies.
Dheeraj, talent. Let's talk about talent a little bit. I think one of the things that young companies really struggle with and founders really struggle with is when is the right time to bring on world-class talent? You know, often world-class talent it's expensive. It's always hard to get. And it's easy to get tempted into thinking that, let me go a little bit further before I take this step. What would you advise? And when did you have a battle with this? I mean, it's a little different in the Valley, but what words of advice would you have?
Well, I think you never take shortcuts in terms of talent, and I'm sure everybody here in the room also has the same belief as well. And obviously, there's a cliche that people say, you know, you hire people who are better than you because then they go and do the right things. But when you hire the better people, the thing that you don't compromise on is attitude. Because, you know, at some level, people who really think that it's all about them are the most pernicious elements of a company, actually.
Irrespective of competence.
Absolutely. And obviously, you need to be 90th percentile in talent, but somebody who says, I'm 100th percentile, and when you're interviewing them, it's all about I, and then you'll see the number of I's they'll actually use, you know, it's kind of an absolute untouchable.
That's a red flag for you. Yeah.
Absolute red flag, you know. And, you know, I think so I think with that caveat, I think everything else is important about talent. You want to let go. I mean, that's one of the things that I've learned as an entrepreneur is, especially given my past experience with this previous company, what does it mean to let go as an entrepreneur? Because it's like, you know, you're a parent and you have a child and the child is growing up, and at some point the child is going to act like a millennial, they will rebel and they want to do their own things and they want to have their own space. So letting go and making sure that the talent that you've actually hired feels like they're moving the needle is very important as well. Because otherwise, if you make them as doers, then a lot of them will just move on. And there's no easy way to let go, because on an everyday basis, I constantly struggle on this, and even till today, actually. Am I getting too deep, or am I actually backing off too much, where I'm not aware of the details, and then it's kind of more fluffy and at some point and so on. So it's an everyday negotiation with myself, just within myself.
Yeah.
Even when I'm writing emails, I'm thinking about, am I overdoing this or am I overdoing that, actually? You know?
Yes, you're very mindful.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We've got a few more minutes, but one last question before we open to a couple of questions from the audience. Tough moments, and how do you grind through them? You know, I know one for you was at least late 2015. The window was open to get public. The plan was to get public. January and end of last year, the world changed, and it felt like the window was shut. When you've built to a point that you think this is going to happen, and you've geared a lot of activity towards making that happen, how do you go back in and sort of say, okay, a plan's changed now, and it's a difficult financing environment now, and the world is saying, hey, can these highly valued companies actually can they raise capital in this environment? How do you bounce back from something like that? How do you re-energize if you even had to? I'd love if you could just share a couple of insights from that, or any other tough decisions.
Yeah. Well, I think the preparation happens for this thing, or at least this rite of passage, the walking on fire, for the 6 years before that, actually, or it was happening every day. Because we never really got too deep into the froth of the unicorns. Said, look, let's be, doing our work, whatever we're doing. I mean, I could have gone and raised our last round, which was Series E in August of 14, at a much higher valuation than what I eventually did. Because I said, I need quality investors. I don't need hedge funds to come in right now. And Fidelity and Wellington were, private round investors 2 years ago. So rather than try to maximize the short term, I said I need to maximize the long term. And that helped me a lot. Because then, unlike some of our peers who had borrowed from the future in terms of valuation, and then that became the tail that wagged the dog for the pricing of the IPO and things like that, we said, let's make it a win-win. So Series E was a win-win for me because I raised money at 2 billion. I could have raised money at 3 billion if I really wanted to or something. But that was probably one of the master strokes of the thing. I didn't wanted to get in this froth of a unicorn or a $3 billion company because, hey, Wall Street can show you higher up in the pecking order versus something else. It didn't really matter at that point in time. And we did something very similar. So I think the company was prepared for when the death of the unicorn stuff was happening. It was like, oh, this froth is going to die. These are all frothy companies. They don't have the substance. And we just knew internally that the strength was within. That the death of the unicorn meant nothing and the rise of the unicorn meant nothing as well. So when we were pricing our IPO, which was about 6 weeks ago, we were again becoming the same humble company that we were. Like, look, let's price at a point which is a win-win, as opposed to try to extract everything from the investors. Because in some sense, the company is like this veritable elephant that nobody knows, like with the ears and the legs. And I mean, nobody knows who we are right now. So only in the next 3 to 4 years will people know.
There's still a way to go.
Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, I think what helped us in these last 9 months was business as usual. S1 was public, so we were acting like a public company, except for the fact that we're not trading. The muscle memory of being a public company was actually honing. And we did a pretty good job of those 9 months of, and the way we communicated to our people, the way they build their muscle memory. I think one of the best things to happen to this company was that delay. When the oil crisis happened, and I'm probably one of those fatalists who always believes everything happens for a reason. Everything. When you look back, you're like, well, you know what? It's the best thing to happen to the company itself.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think even in this short conversation, one can pick up just how value-driven the company is, and how much of it, when you're faced with these tough calls, goes back to what do I believe, or we as a founder group believe is the right thing. And that's sometimes easier to stray away from, especially in these kind of momentum environments. So thank you, Dheeraj. Maybe if we have time for 1-2 questions from the audience for Dheeraj. There's one from the front here.
Dheeraj, I've heard you speak about authenticity and vulnerability. Could you sort of chat a little bit more about that and how that ties into your culture?
Yeah, I think, authenticity is probably my favorite word for some time now. Again, part of the culture of a company. And when I say company, it's not just employees within, but also with customers and partners outside. What does it mean to have that authentic relationship? And the word authentic to me is now become a formula, and this is attributed to one of the TED speakers, and his name is Mike Robbins. And he talks about how that formula is, based on this continuum of honesty, where on the left of it is kind of dishonest people, slime balls you don't talk to, work with. But then honesty is in the middle of this continuum. It's not really on the right of this, and it's very contrarian. You're like, what do you mean honesty is not to the right already? And he mentioned something really profound too, and these words now have become kind of the pillars of the way we actually do communication, press releases, discussions with our customers, manager-employee discussions. So it's like you've got to take something out of honesty and add something to honesty to make it authentic. And it gives you a pause, and you're like, well, tell me more, what's really that intriguing formula? And he says, you've got to take out self-righteousness. And self-righteousness, just in simple terms, is if I'm right, you must be wrong. That's self-righteousness. So you take out self-righteousness and you add a very powerful word that we don't use in the corporate world today. It's vulnerability. And then you just repeat it in your head one more time. Honesty minus self-righteousness plus vulnerability is authenticity. And I'm really enamored by this whole concept now. I mean, when it comes to, again, as I said, the way we treat our employees, the way we treat our customers, the way we treat our partners, and we constantly apply this litmus test of, are we being self-righteous? Are we being vulnerable enough in our communication, in the way we portray ourselves, in the way managers talk to employees, in the way employees talk to managers? All this stuff. I mean, even in the boardroom. I was listening to Jerry Levine, who is the ex-CEO of Time Warner. He was probably one of the most powerful CEOs of his time just 20 years ago. And he was one who actually was instrumental in this integration of AOL and Time Warner back in the year 2001. And 77 now. And he was speaking at the SAP CEO Summit last week, just about 8 days ago. And there's about 70, 80 CEOs in the room. This is like Fortune 500 CEOs, the who's who of the world, probably the most powerful people in the world. I was sitting in that crowd, and he said something really, really meaningful and profound. And he's 77 now. He's kind of Parkinson's disease, so his hand was shaking. And he said, in '97, I lost my son in gun violence in the streets of New York. And they came and knocked at the door. The cops came and said, "Your son has passed away." And he said, "It took me 6 weeks, and I went back to work when I shouldn't have." But the point he was trying to make was that back in the day, he was untouchable. He was superhuman. The board wanted to have him act like a superhuman when he was just another human being that he just wasn't ready to be, because if anybody came by him and wanted to talk about something, it's like, if you have anything to do which will benefit Time Warner, I'm going to spend time with you, not otherwise, and so on, And the way he was reflective of what life is and what being vulnerable is and how we need to celebrate vulnerability in the boardroom was just mind-boggling. Every CEO in the crowd was crying, every CEO. And I think that's what we need to bring to our corporate world, is this idea of celebrating vulnerability. And how do you really make relationships in our professional lives equally authentic as well, as opposed to we have two lives. This is the superhuman one, which has the superhero kind of personality and sort of visual, and then you have this other life that you lead, which is where you're a mother or a father or a son or a daughter and so on.
Great. I guess one last. Okay, we're out of time, I'm afraid. Sorry, I'm getting the time out. Thank you very much, Dheeraj, and thank you all for attending and listening. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks again. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.